No, this isn't another failed Friday the 13th reboot. It's actually the 2015 meta-horror film The Final Girls, which takes a look at camp-based slasher films of the 80s, and most predominantly the franchise featuring masked killer Jason Voorhees. In this film, we follow characters who leave our real world behind and are thrust into a fantasy reality for movie. We've seen these ideas before with films like Pleasantville and Last Action Hero, and sadly this self-reflexive comedy of horror isn't as enjoyable as either of them.
Trust me.
Not to say I didn't like this film, it's just that it left me disappointed because of its potential. I think it was the overall approach the director and the writers took to the context of this particular genre that was frustrating when I was watching it. Now I have to say that I love the Friday the 13th franchise, and films that are self-aware and deconstruct their own genre. Previous works like Scream and The Cabin in the Woods do an amazing job at that, and aren't just enjoyable horror movies, they work at a great comedic level as well.
I'm still on speakerphone, aren't I?
Though I didn't believe The Final Girls was going to be anywhere near their tone after I saw the trailer, it was learning off the M rating that had me a little bit concerned, which brings me to my first real issue.
Hey, what is happening?
I don't know.
My thoughts exactly when I saw this film was M. Now there's nothing wrong with that rating, there's an incredible amount of M films out there that feature the horror genre and work for all audiences. But it does feel strange to have that rating on a meta film based on Friday the 13th, a horror flick in the slasher subgenre, which is often so hard rated because of its gruesome kills and sexual content. Add on top of that, the fictional slasher they've created within this film, called Camp Bloodbath, is rated R, something they make very clear, and yet we see no content that could possibly earn that rating within this film. Now it's true, we do see kills, but nowhere near the graphical content we're used to seeing in the Friday the 13th franchise. A lot of what made it so popular was seeing these characters trying to survive Jason, and how he was going to kill them. They became these big, shocking and exciting moments. Each one of them was unique, surprising and practical. In The Final Girls though, we just get these very clean deaths, and it really comes across as a failure to commit and not risk losing that lower rating. Let's compare this to the film Last Action Hero, which is in a similar situation, also having that same M rating, but because it's parodying action films of the time and is about a genre that varied wildly in its ratings, it can get away with having mild to sometimes even cartoonish rated action. But saying that, the film doesn't shy away from having some very dark scenes that reflect the violence of the genre. Now this varying tone doesn't necessarily work well for Last Action Hero, but at least it goes as far to properly reflect its genre, unlike The Final Girls, which actually missteps in a key aspect of its parody, The Final Girl. Now, not the film as a whole, but the idea of The Final Girl, which if you don't know about is a horror movie trope where our lead protagonist is a sole survivor of a story. She's usually the virgin of the group, who's intelligent and level-headed, and innocent who's vigilant to the events taking place that are out of the ordinary, and is less driven to take part in things that could get her killed, like sex, drugs, and naked moonlit skinny dipping in a lake where an unstoppable killing machine was drowned as a child. And although Final Girls don't share a specific look they must adhere to, they don't really look and act like this.
Did I miss the Kumbaya circle?
The Final Girl isn't usually renowned for being cool and super confident, or as someone that wears leather jackets and drives muscle cars, which is probably why nothing about this seems right. I mean, she's a badass right from the get-go, and this isn't the sequel. Also, when this Final Girl was killed unexpectedly, it fails to have the impact on the story that it probably should, and I think that's because the character didn't suit the trope in the first place. If Camp Bloodbath is playing off the earlier Friday the 13th films, then how is Paula supposed to be the final girl? She's more like Fox from Part 3 or even Taryn from Dream Warriors. All the while Nancy, whose very name is even a reference to one of the most popular final girls ever, Nancy Thompson, is an easy choice to be Camp Bloodbath's version of Alice, who was the survivor of the original Friday the 13th film. Her personality more suits the role, and looks-wise, she's a much closer fit. And since we're on looks, let's talk about the visual aspects of this film.
They're disgusting.
Now in the beginning, we're introduced to Camp Bloodbath with its trailer. It's gritty, it's desaturated, it has that damaged and aged film look pushed to the extreme. It's trying to emulate how those 80s slasher films looked before the restoration process. We know that, but when we get to the part of the story where our real world characters actually step into this fictitious film, we get this. Straight away I was wondering why the colour was so vibrant. 80s slashers for the most part have a naturalistic to slightly desaturated look, but in this we get these incredibly intense colours, and I can't rationalise why they would go with this particular visual style. Understandably, they want to create separation between the real world and Camp Bloodbath's fantasy reality, but grading your image to try and emulate some degree of how Friday the 13th originally looked is probably the logical choice. As well as the colour grade, even some of the lighting and camera techniques used in The Final Girls puzzle me. At times it feels like the director is practicing his best David Fincher panic room impression and attempting impressive visual moments, rather than working with a cinematographer to create visuals that feel natural to the tone of the film, and to the subgenre it's based around. But saying that, they do manage to do it sometimes. This whole film is a strange mix of traditional horror techniques and this almost music video aesthetic that detracts from the conventions they're supposedly playing off. And at the same time, they're pulling us out of the moment because the shot becomes more important than the characters. When you actually have to build a bigger cabin just because you need to fit a motion control rig in it for the shot, you need to ask yourself, do you really need it to tell the story? And does it work in the context of the film's style of cinematography? This is a great example of not remembering that sometimes less is more, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think what led to my disappointment in this film is that it didn't really understand how far it had to go to play off the Friday the 13th films. It didn't have to thoroughly dissect the slasher formula like Scream did, and that's not what this story's about, but it at least should have deconstructed the core traits of the franchise and explore a little bit deeper than just having a camp full of counselors and its own version of Jason. I think whenever a film is made that is self-reflexive or parodies a particular film or genre, people have a certain expectation of what that film has to live up to. I know I do. When you play off films that people have a huge passion for, it's in part ways a creative form of fan service, as well as a look into genre conventions. Meta films give the audience more of what they've seen before, but from a different point of view, and one that might give new meaning. The Final Girls had a story to tell. It showed us a different point of view literally inside the horror subgenre. But because it didn't fully commit to having what is expected in the horror genre of its parody, which is strong horror elements, this film for me will always be seen as a soft attempt at playing off the popularity of Friday the 13th, with no real passion for the franchise.